So, since there is a security system in states, even if it is national, it is necessary to formulate what dangers exist and their classification. And here, in this picture, it is visible what kinds of dangers can exist. Military weapons of destruction. Dangers to the gene pool and everything related to health, which involves the reproduction of generations. And here, one can also relate, because it is important, what else, before illustrating. One can create a whole bunch of these dangers and securities, and you can get confused in them. It is necessary to reduce it to a minimum so that there is a clear stratification and classification of all these dangers and securities. And the priorities of generalized means allow for such a classification to be carried out. Therefore, one can include genocide and various food additives here, as well as poisoning, food security, and so on. Cosmetics, which are also striking, this is where the weapon of genocide belongs. Economic dangers primarily include usury, ships, and usurious interest rates. The means, the credit and financial system, which serves as a tool for unstructured governance of nations. Technological priority means technologies that deceive people's consciousness and manipulate their minds. And not only consciousness, but there can also be technical means that harm the development of humanity. That is, here the spectrum can be expanded and classified. But overall, in a comprehensive view, in a generalized form, that is why the priority is called generalized means, because classification can also be conducted within it. However, what we have considered lies on the surface. These are religions, ideologies, and various sects that have developed, as well as teachings, of which there are many now, and so on. Some extremists. By the way, what is extremism? There is now a law on extremism. But what is the definition of extremism? Well, it's when someone seems to be against something or someone. But how? There is no clear measure of understanding. And then, from the perspective of the concept of public safety, extremist teachings include the Deuteronomy of Isaiah from the Bible that I read to you. Is that not extremism? It certainly is. And you will rule over many nations, but they will not rule over you. And the countries and nations and kings who do not want to serve you, those nations will be destroyed. How? Unbelievable. And this is the truth, you see. God said, "What are you talking about? Respectable people, one can be prosecuted for this, but it is not them who are judged, but rather those who say it is an abomination." By the way, if we are talking about Leo Nikolaevich Tolstoy, we have touched upon that. Leo Nikolaevich Tolstoy wrote a whole work titled "Why Christian Nations and the Russian People in particular are in such a dire situation," where he exposed the falsehood of the teaching. It was not Jesus Christ, but the teaching of Jesus Christ was altered by the agent of the synod, Paul of Tarsus, who became an apostle. And initially the contemporaries of this Saul of Tarsus wanted to call it Paulism, meaning he preached this teaching, distorting the teaching of Christ. How this is done is also described. Read the novel, or rather the work of the internal predictor of the USSR, Master and Margarita, Hymn to Demonism, or the Gospel of Unconditional Faith. It is also described in detail there. That is, you see what things, and this is not considered subservience. That's how it is accepted. What does "that's how it is accepted" mean? Leo Nikolaevich Tolstoy said, "A lie does not cease to be a lie because millions of people are guided by it. If this is a lie, then what is here? That's how it is accepted. It was accepted that the earth is a pancake on 3 elephants on 3 whales. Then it turned out to be different. So what if it is accepted now? And the fact that all these sores are hidden in the concept of public safety, they are exposed, and it is said how it should be. We are actually experiencing something similar if we draw historical parallels. Not everything revolves around the earth, but the earth revolves around the sun. That's approximately how it is now. Yes, it is initially perceived, well, like in the song, first it's scary, then it will pass, meaning there should be a rethinking. What are the further dangers? What we called chronological dangers. Here you go, the danger of this representation of history by Fomenko and Yanovsky. I already told you, does it breed brain mush in people's minds? In general, so to speak, it is leveled out. Not only is our entire history there turned upside down and distorted, but Fomenko and Yanovsky introduced such inversions. How can a person determine that? So is it or isn't it was the Battle of Kulikovo? It turns out on the territory of Moscow, or what, nearby in the Moscow region? Once again, what is the thesis? I have many facts. How to look at these facts? From what position do you, esteemed Fomenko and Yanovsky, view these events? You have none there. That's why we say, provide your worldview standard. Do you see management in the global historical process or not? By the way, there is a critical work by Fomenko and Yanovsky called Conducting Non-Algebra. Read it. But what is the essence? If the person who describes historical events does not understand management in the global historical process, does not know how the concentration of management of social processes was carried out, then for him, all these events are just a mess in the head. Therefore, one cooked one porridge and gives it to the students, while another cooked a different porridge. And all these porridges together create a cocktail of porridge. And so to speak, no one wants to eat this porridge. It causes disgust. Therefore, we say that it is impossible to describe all the facts. Historical events must be viewed from the perspective of managing them. And management is conducted according to a certain concept. And processes should be considered as they occur in supersystems. Thus, it is necessary to provide methods and ways of management, including unstructured ones, which are given in a sufficient general theory of management. And in the sufficient general theory of management, it is not officially taught anywhere, although our colleagues are already teaching it. I will talk about this later in the concluding lecture, what measures are being taken by us, in particular, so that everyone knows about all this. And finally, here is the highest methodological priority. So, it allows a person to consciously relate to everything that is happening around them. And if a person is deprived of this priority, that is, they do not possess it, they can be manipulated. Well, in general, this scale is the most important, what should be understood from this picture. That the threats are not only external, that there are NATO countries, well, what are they scaring patriots with? That NATO is uniting. So what? And Putin is right. We need to enter NATO and undermine it from within. That is, integrate it, subordinate it to our goals. What is there to be afraid of? If you understand that your concept is unite and thrive, there is no need for this confrontation. So all these Ivashovs, generals, authorities, who say that here are all the patriots, NATO at Russia's borders, so what's the point? You won't achieve anything by force. Well, we had the invincible, legendary, and there were the Warsaw Pact countries. They were, where are they now? Was it by war that we were destroyed? We were destroyed at the highest priorities of generalized means? Is it really that hard to understand? They took it without war. This prioritization, so to speak, allows us to understand how this is done. And if we are to speak like this, if we want to defeat them, then we can win from higher priorities than what they took from us. Credit and financial systems have distorted history. So what can we take only by elevating ourselves on a worldview priority, and what to cultivate them? Them, where? At scientific conferences, international ones, to emerge with the law of time, with an understanding of managing the global historical process. To speak on these topics, to talk about religions, their role in management, to uncover, if we talk, for example, about the Quran, there is Islamic fundamentalism, and we tell Muslims, but you do not live according to the Quran. And like this, the Quran says, cursed be the Jew who consumes people's property unjustly. Allah permitted trade, but prohibited usury. Are you engaged in usury? Osama bin Laden, who is an authority, where does he keep his money? In a Swiss bank. What kind of Muslim is he? The Quran says, and let there be among you a community that calls to goodness, enjoins what is right, and bids what is wrong. These are happy. What is the translation of community in French? Commune. So it turns out that the Quran speaks of communism, Wow, what an understanding. And what are you doing in Chechnya? Are you establishing a slave-owning system? What kind of Muslims are you then? If the Quran teaches that all people are free and you are restoring slavery, Allah did not permit this. This is what needs to be discussed. And then the problems will be resolved. And in the Bible, it is also necessary to discuss what is from God and what is not from God. And only then will these contradictions be resolved, because these contradictions are created specifically to implement the principle of divide, incite, rule. That is, referring again to this poster, there are not only external threats, but also internal threats. That is, as one classic said, there is nothing worse than herding your fools. There are indeed such fools within our country who, so to speak, are just an inconvenience. Recognizing this allows for a clear stratification, classification of threats from the perspective of prioritized, generalized management tools. This is important to understand. That is, summarizing this, we see that with the help of priorities and generalized management tools for people, applying them in modern life, one can assess past historical events, how certain battles, historical events, disputes, the collapse of states, the annexation of states, and the fall of empires were achieved. That is, there was nothing like, oh, it's all nonsense. Just as the USSR did not collapse, neither did all those empires. There was simply a process of concentrating control over productive forces, and it followed a certain management concept that allowed subjugating various countries and peoples, integrating them to fulfill the tasks set by this global mafia. Now, through types of power and priorities of generalized tools, one can sketch out how the global predictor managed and still manages, although all of this is already coming out of obedience with countries and peoples. Here is a reminder. Do you remember this fist? Conceptual power, ideological, legislative, executive, and judicial. That is, these 5 types of power. And here in the picture it is presented, here is state X. In the state, there are government bodies. Government bodies manage society. As a result, some outcome is achieved. It doesn't matter what it is. What matters is that there is an abstract result. This result is evaluated by global mafias through feedback, that is, the global predictor, conceptual power. How does it affect the state? By possessing conceptual power, it influences government bodies through the pluralism of ideologies. Where confusion reigns in minds, everyone argues with each other, the ruling party, opposition, and so on. One can speak of a 2-party system, for example, in the USA. How does it manage? Well, I'll tell you a bit later. Next, legislative power. From the perspective of the concept, laws are invented. You already know that one law can be created and another can be different. That is the concept of law. Well, let's say we are developing a law, for example, about taxes. If, in my goal setting, it is necessary for people to live normally, to develop, and so on, one tax needs to be adopted, and another, his opinion means, what will they do there? And I need to keep them in a black body all the time. So I will invent another tax. Well, that's obvious. That is, people are guided by their concepts, that is, their ideals, when inventing laws. And these ideals are formed by the corresponding concept. And what perhaps is the concept? I am the smartest, and everyone else is a fool, and I will parasitize on their labor. This is the concept of a slave-owning system. There are only 2 concepts. One is just, the other is unjust. But the unjust ones are also divided into 2. There are the open ones like Chubais, Nemtsov, and Kakamada. And they, frankly speaking, do not want the people to recognize it because the people will protest against it. How can you say that It seems there are the destitute, the poor, and so on. They are for justice, but in fact they are just like Chubais, Berbulis, and all these Kakamadas. Why? because they only act cunningly. These are all Zhuganov supporters and others. They say, how? We are for justice. But in reality, what is implied by default, we will be the bosses. You come to us and we will tell you what is just and what is not. So it turns out to be hidden slavery, that's all. So one concept is purely just, and the unjust one either obvious or hidden. That's it. So which is more dangerous? The hidden one, right? Because people can clearly see the villains. But those who seem to speak about good, in reality it is difficult to expose this. This is where the power of these lies. Why do they deceive the people? These Zhuganov supporters and all these Marxists, Trotskyists. This is where the power lies, because the slogans are good. They took them in 1917. Why? Land to the peasants, factories to the workers. So what? Did they give anything? They gave nothing. It remained in the hands of a handful. Only under the guise of just slogans did they do their thing. That's the whole point. Yes, there were certain concessions and so on, but it did not fundamentally resolve the slave-owning system. So the legislative power, that is, laws are invented from the perspective of a concept. Well, the executive power, what does it execute? And the judicial power maintains order, and you see how it maintains order. Now everything has really gone off the rails. Why? Because the conceptual power is collapsing by the law of time. But here is a simple scheme, so that you understand how to understand. And further, the influence on the state according to the priorities of generalized means. Management is conducted in a structural and unstructured way. It is, through the education system, the first priority, an incorrect methodology is provided. So, pluralism is introduced into people's minds primarily, secondarily their consciousness, and so on. That is, who implements this knowledge? The system of preschool, school, higher, and academic education. The same goes for historical myths, who tells them? Teachers in schools, right? In universities. It turns out the entire education system is a tool for implementing an alien conceptual power. The same goes for all parties. They themselves do not understand that they are working for someone else, because they implement the principle of divide and conquer. In the economy, all these entrepreneurs are also bustling about, exporting, importing, and do not realize that they are doomed. You see what nonsense? The healthcare system? As soon as money stands between the doctor and the patient, there can be no health care. All of this is inevitably doomed. Moreover, unfortunately, the dismemberment of a person is inevitable. We have an eye doctor, an ear doctor, heart specialists, and specialists for kidneys. That is, each doctor is responsible for a certain part of a person, but a person is whole, and our doctors specialize in everything. That is, when it comes to treating a person and preserving their health, one must approach it from a holistic perspective. Here is the principle of divide and rule, and ultimately, what should we arrive at? Is a person material? Do they possess an informational state? And a person has a measure. All diseases stem from the destruction of measure. That is, when a person lives out of harmony with God. It disrupts their overall measure. This leads to materialization, ulcers, and other ailments. The entire healthcare system should be completely different. And of course, diseases need to be treated, no doubt about that. But generally speaking, the main efforts should be directed towards preventing illness altogether. And this requires appropriate upbringing, education, starting from childhood, as well as a culture of nutrition and behavior. And it all goes on from there. That is, we live in a kingdom of distorted mirrors, you understand. Well, and in the extreme case, this is the sixth priority. Weapons when something needs to be resolved quickly. To take some leader who has started doing something wrong, to deploy troops, to destroy, to suppress a coup, a revolution, and so on. That is the power of weapons. Here is the priority of generalized means. And it turns out that we seem to be electing presidents. But in reality, it doesn't solve anything. All of this is inscribed in an alien conceptual power. Therefore, we will not achieve anything in our country if we do not change one just concept of public safety. And this is facilitated by the situation in the informational state of society that currently exists on our planet. Here is the next management scheme that reveals some nuances. So there is a global predictor, that is, it is the mafia that governs based on a concept. There is state X, government bodies, society, and through conceptual power, ideological, legislative, executive, management is carried out, as we have examined. But what kind of management is it? This picture clearly shows it. Management is not very stable. A normal person finds it difficult to understand. A normal person wants stability, for everything to be good. But such stability is not needed by globalists. Globalists do not need it. They need a constant swing. War, peace, good, bad. This is how the principle of divide and conquer is implemented. That is, it is also done according to the situation in the country. Good, bad. Therefore, you see it going this way and that way. And it doesn't matter for the government authorities to strengthen because then they can pursue an independent policy. We have already considered the relationship between global politics and domestic and foreign policy. For example, remember the pyramids when these conduct global policy, while the elite of countries and nations conduct domestic and foreign policy. And in order for them not to come to an understanding of global politics, a decision was made to also dismember the USSR and Russia. The USSR was dismembered, and they are trying to dismember Russia. But the exact same situation applies to the United States. And in relation to the United States, this mafia, leaders of transnational banks and corporations, are managing the United States. And there is a two-party political framework, Republicans and Democrats. Well, there are also various scarecrows like Ross Perot and so on. How is the management carried out? Just imagine it's like a mafia. There are many states. We cannot directly do this or that. There are authorities and the people there. We must create the appearance that they are worth something on their own. How is this done? It is done by dividing the national economy of the country into two parts. The first part is the raw materials extraction complex. People produce goods and trade among themselves in various ways. All sectors of industry can be reduced to two. The first industries are raw materials extraction, and the second industries of the national economy are processing, which produce pens, food products, coffee grinders, televisions, etc. The raw materials extraction industries have their own uniqueness, which translates into foreign languages as mentality. What kind? It is necessary for the oil pump to pump steadily, and that's good. In other words, I don't want anything to change. In the processing industries, a rapid change of technologies is required. To sell their products, it is necessary to respond quickly to changes in demand. This is what we have already considered using the example of fashion. In other words, to sell a product, you need to constantly offer something new. Therefore, the mentality and uniqueness of the people involved in the processing industry are more dynamic. How to manage, how to pit these people against each other. And the difference of interests. Therefore, the difference of interests is expressed by parties. Therefore, in the USA, the interests of the raw materials industries are represented by the Republican Party, while the interests of the processing industries are represented by the Democratic Party. The name of the party has no meaning. This is what is important to understand. That is, call it whatever you want. And the essence is this. And the essence is... And then certainly a push is made when the electoral procedures, which are advantageous for conceptual power, do not require stability. A person or group of people came to lead the country, and they were given a term of 4 years. Why 4? Because then they will start to understand something. That is how it is managed, even if they don't understand anything, like how they put Schwarzenegger in. What does he understand about management? He understands nothing. That's why they appoint people, and after a period of time, once they have gained some experience, what should be done with them, and new ones who also understand nothing. Electoral procedures serve this purpose, and the people are convinced that there should be a change of power. But why? If everything is fine, Managers, let's say, a shoemaker, he becomes a better shoemaker year after year, which means he gains qualifications and managerial work. It also gains management skills year after year. Therefore, electoral procedures such as these contribute to this. Remove one and bring in another. And what is important next? Since it is important for raw material producers to stabilize the situation when it needs to be stabilized, they bring Republicans to power. Representatives of the extractive industry, when something needs to be done quickly, like reforms and transformations, who do they bring in? Democrats like Clinton? They are managed in a non-structured way. How are they managed, for example, the presidents like Clinton? Well, the whole country, or rather all of humanity, knows that he turned the Oval Office into an oral one with Monica Lewinsky. Therefore, knowing his weaknesses, there's a dossier on him, they will pull him by one place, and Clinton bombs Belgrade. This is the method of non-structured management. If it doesn't happen, we will announce something there. Outright blackmail. These people are managed non-structurally. They are hinted at, but they are pushed, just like how they managed Bush. After all, remember how Bush dodged the war in Iraq. He understood that if he entered there, he wasn't completely stupid. Imagine getting involved in a war with the Islamic world, and the globalists need this. You're a complete moron, that is. He doesn't even know what he's thinking. You write about dragging a war into the Islamic world, but a globalizer needs this. Right. They organized dive of Boeing planes into the skyscrapers of New York. So what? Further, these thoughtless journalists incite excitement among the people, and the leader of the country must be guided by the masses. But how to approach the elections?